Well, good afternoon, everyone, and this is an amazing crowd, and we've got an amazing panel to welcome you to, so I'm looking forward to hearing the thoughts from this great group, and I'm going to ask you each, if you wouldn't mind, to just introduce yourselves, just talk a little bit about your background. That would be great.
Shall I start?
Start, Ross.
Okay.
Yes,
hi, I'm Ross Mason. I'm the founder of MuleSoft. Our mission is to help every enterprise, every company move faster and be more agile and innovate by unlocking and connecting the applications, data, and devices. And the reason I'm here is actually, we do this across industries, but we have a keen focus on financial services. So we have some of the biggest banks in the world driving massive transformation programs on our platform, all the way through to a number of fintechs, including people like Bank in the UK.
I'm Boden. I'm the CEO and founder of Starling Bank. And after 30 years in traditional banking and looking after technology and big operations, I decided to start a new bank. But this new bank was going to be different. It's going to be based on all new technology, a new infrastructure that's actually going to do things very, very differently. And 5 years later, we have a great retail proposition, a current account on an app, an SME bank that's doing very, very well. But even more exciting, we are using our platform to enable other businesses. And this year, we've announced great partnerships with governments, big banks, and fintechs to power their own businesses. So as well as that, we have a marketplace, and we're really big into APIs, because I passionately believe that the API economy can transform our industry.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm the banker here, so the incumbent. I'm Calmejane. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Societe Generale. Societe Generale is about 147,000 employees in the world, present in 50 countries. We have business in retail bank, in commercial bank, as well as markets and various places. So what's very interesting is the diversity of the model and how do you transform. We recently have a strategy about open platforms, and we've been very vocal about it. In the commercial bank, and I will talk more about it, it's been in place for a couple of years now. In the retail bank, we've recently announced our intention to acquire Trésor, which is a fintech in France who provide back-end payment services, API, KYC, personalized cards to fintech like Starling. So we're definitely moving and accelerating on this space.
Perfect, thank you. Well, I guess maybe the first question is just, let's just try and level set with everybody. Let's just talk about the definition of what a platform actually is, and maybe Ross, again, just start with you.
Yeah, so if you think about traditional banking, banks have gone to market by having verticalized products, right? So you can get consumer accounts, loans, mortgages, et cetera, small business and consumer. And those are vertical products. A platform is much more horizontal, and what it does, it provides a set of products and services that can be used in different ways to bring new products and services to market. And the way we're doing this is with APIs. So if you look at some of the biggest transformation programs happening at the moment, it's actually happening in financial services. And the reason why banks need to be platforms or die, right, is purely because the pressure from the disruption happening in banking, because frankly, money has gone digital, it's gone fluid, and the rest of the world hasn't really caught up. If you just look at the ecosystem of fintechs, you look at the ecosystem, what's happening in crypto assets, cryptocurrency, and blockchain, and then you look at the slow, monolithic, very convoluted processes that banks have built up over the last 40 years, there's a massive divide. And what we're talking about is banking Darwinism, right? But it's not about the big eating the small anymore, it's about the fast eating the slow. Yeah. And that banking platform is there to really enable banks to move much, much faster and actually play in the innovation arenas that are happening in crypto and in fintech.
Yeah, when I started Starling, I was determined I was going to build a platform that had none of the horrible things that I found in my day-to-day life in traditional banks. Banking hasn't changed for many hundreds of years. the banks tried to do all the various parts of the value chain. But most other industries have transformed. Nowadays, when people start businesses, they basically plug and play the components together. They use SaaS services to buy the things they need. What we, Starling Bank, and lots of others in the industry are doing at present is looking at banking in that sort of way. Let's look at the value chain end to end. Let's see how we can decompose it and join it back together again using APIs. For Starling Bank, you can use our payment services, you can use our virtual accounts, you can use the whole banking license. And we plug it together in a way that's very easy to consume. So when people go to their bank in the old world, they'd go, can I talk to a relationship manager? Can I talk to somebody from transaction banking? Can we have lots of workshops? Can we have a long negotiation? I believe banking is going to move to a platform basis, where our corporates, where our governments, with people buying payments and services, will simply go to a website and consume what they need. We need to change the engagement model for banking, and that's what people like ourselves are doing in the industry.
We'll come back and dig in a little bit on that, but maybe just from you, Claire.
Definitely. I was mentioning, like we've been moving in the commercial bank, especially in a platform business model for a couple of years. So what does it mean concretely? That means that, like over the past years, we took about 150 monolithic applications and we moved them in this platform API-based model, which we call SG Markets. And in SG Markets, one of the services that was developed this year, for example, was around foreign exchange. And we developed it once. But then we were able very quickly to replicate it and develop it as well for SME and for correspondent banking. And you can do that almost instantly. So rather than building it 3 times in different applications, you have the facility to just connect it in the platform and reuse it. So here comes the efficiency and the operations of it. I think in the retail bank, I was mentioning we've announced our intention to acquire Trésor, which is still under validation from the French regulator. Trésor is a startup that provides all the payments, API, applications, transaction value chain for fintechs like Starling. And for us, it was a very important move because, it was a way to complement our offer and to understand how do we serve customers that maybe we have customers that are deep into the relationship, which is more physical. There is the ones that are using their mobile phone, but we start seeing the ones that are interested by marketplace or platforms. So with Trésor, we're going to explore further these models, but we don't want to do it alone. The beauty of Trésor is that it's come with an ecosystem of clients that are on top. And our challenge is as much to develop the offer for customers, but also to support Trésor in its expansion internationally and to develop further the product.
And Anne, actually, just on that point, maybe just talk a little bit about the way the platform works in terms of it's not necessarily just a two-sided platform and everyone else, comment on that.
I think that most people think that platforms and the engagement between big banks and fintechs is always the fintech sits above the traditional bank and they connect through an API. There's lots of different permutations. I think one of the first implementations of open bank in the UK was with Yacht, which is owned by ING, sitting above a bank which was a new startup bank. We've also got the situation where people like Starling actually provide core services and rails for traditional banks. So there's lots of different permutations here. It isn't as simple as taking infrastructure pipes by old banks and putting agile little fintechs on top of them. There's lots of different permutations happening, and all this is creating a lot of buzz, a lot of innovation, and hopefully customers are gaining.
Yeah, I'd add to that, right? So you often hear in that same breath the API economy, right? And it's not always clear what that is. And essentially, I would define it as the exchange of value between digital providers and digital consumers. And the economy is just the sum of all those transactions. And what Anne is saying is, it isn't just about one consuming from the other, but there's actually value chains being created. And we've seen this play out in the consumer space, right? So if you look at Uber, right? They didn't build maps, they went to Google, right? And they didn't build payments, they went to Stripe. And Stripe went to other payment providers. And what you get is this value chain where everyone in the chain gets a piece of the value being provided by their building block. So these APIs are critical because what they define are the building blocks by which you build these value chains, right? And it's very nascent. I think people are looking for, with APIs, are we done with it? I would say we're just getting started. I think the banking arena in particular is the first mover, but we're going to see banking products, banking services being offered and consumed on all sides, whether it's new fintechs, traditional banking, newer players in the market like Amazon with their banking capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to become a very interesting market over the next 5 years where we won't talk about integrated products, we'll talk about value chains across ecosystems.
And I think traditional banks could decide which part of that value chain they want to play in. I think certain parts of the value chain will be more attractive than others. I think certain banks will focus on certain parts of that value chain. And I think that I'd be very surprised that if 5-10 years' time, banks look as they do today. There will be specialization. People will look at certain parts of the value chain and say, that's what I'm going to build scale. That's interesting for me. And I'll open up my APIs to other players in the marketplace. And when we plug these different components together, I think you'll have very interesting propositions coming to market.
I think just to build about how do you build these value chains, these ecosystems, for us we have had for the past 4 or 5 years a very deep open innovation program that work with the community about identifying the fintech, the developer, but also the tech companies that may be outside of financial services that are relevant for ecosystem and for clients. So we have about 6 outposts in the world which are scouting all the time and pushing back in the center and educating and changing the culture within the organization about it. I think it's important to understand it's a journey. Like Russ was mentioning, we are at the infancy of it. So it's still the beginning of this model and it has yet to prove itself in the organization. But culturally, I was mentioning we are 147,000 in Societe Generale. There is about 25,000 people that work in our IT department. We're lucky, because we are French headquartered, we have a lot of engineers actually that are there, and we have the beauty to have a very engineering and entrepreneurial culture, which is very vibrant and present. But the challenge is there. The challenge is how do we go further? How do we scale agile in our organization? How do we find the best propositions that are out there? How do we, that's the point of Hannah, how do we work together and don't consider anymore, startup, incumbents, but actually what the customer needs, and I start from my customer need and I build on that. I think my last point will be, platforms are important. Building this ecosystem is hard work, and I think we can talk more about example in the industry. I've seen, firsthand in 2 different banks. I was working at Lloyds Bank for 6.5 years in a domestic market, and now we're at Societe Generale, which is very international, and it represents a lot of challenge to go in this journey. But my last point will be our customer. And our point of view is that the physical network and the distribution network, having physical point of sale and having connection is still critical. And it's still the added value that at the end of the day, when you're a complex operation, when you're a commercial customer and you're thinking, okay, how do I structure my deal? How do I think about my succession? How do I think about transferring my business? You still want this connection. Sure. And this is a differentiating asset of, more traditional model, I think, as well.
When people talk about platforms, they often talk about innovation. Which platform is going to be the most innovative? Which one is going to facilitate the greatest creation of new products? I believe that the big breakthrough is going to be cost. I believe that the big banks will copy everything the fintechs will do. It'll be a couple of years late, but it'll get there. The big differentiator is that new people providing these services are providing these services with hundreds of people and tens of millions of cost base, rather than tens of thousands of people and billions of cost base. What we're doing at the moment is creating these new entities with new technology that are fresh and innovative and are very, very affordable. And when we choose to deliver a platform that changes the cost base and is 100 times cheaper, then we actually can deliver banking to all.
So effectively, are you saying that the commercialisation is going to be the trigger that drives the change? Anyone think? I think we all agree we're very early on the journey, but is that going to be the thing? Is regulation going to help in any way, do you think?
Well, we've had PSD2 and we've had open banking in the UK. Very important legislation that has actually forced traditional banks to open up their APIs. But I don't think we need regulation to make the API economy work. We at Starling are doing APIs because we think it makes commercial sense. And most people who really understand the industry know it's going to happen anyway. So, yeah, thanks for regulation, we're following it, but we don't need it. There's great things happening in the commercial world anyway, because the commercial imperatives around the APIs are very, very strong.
Yeah, I'm not so sure, though. I mean, sorry, just on the... I think open banking and PSD2 and even you look at blockchain and how that's starting to unite different ecosystems to think differently about how they communicate with each other. These things do add value. I would look at them as accelerants to get more people at the table thinking about how to structure themselves in a different way for a future of digital banking. So will they be the tipping point? No, I think you're right. I think there'll be... it's going to be more around the numerous building blocks and the cost to access those building blocks and build new products and services will be the ultimate tipping point. But I think what's throwing fuel on the fire is you know, every bank that MuleSoft works with is looking at open banking, right? And they're looking to understand, okay, how do I turn a set of consumer bank accounts or loaning capabilities into APIs when, you know, I've spent the last 40 years just bolting, you know, horrible pieces of software together any way I could to try and make them work. They fundamentally have to go back to the table and think differently. Yeah. And they wouldn't do that if there wasn't regulation, because banks actually respond greatest to regulation because there's obviously a legal and you know, other penalties associated with regulation. So I actually, bizarrely, they might disagree, but I think it helps.
Well, interestingly, so Claire, you've worked both in the regulatory push and then now in where you don't have the push. So your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think definitely, you know, I was living in the UK, and in the UK there was a notion of API economy, but more importantly, there was a regulation coming top-down on open banking, where they had set up at government level a body that accreditates startups and fintech as well as other banks in order to give permission to access the data in the system, which is pushing all this notion of platforms. I've then joined a bank that is international but French headquarter based, which don't have this regulation of open banking, and they had started this journey anyway. So I will say, much like Anne was saying, you know, like it's starting and it's there. I think the difference, when you look at the industry, it's interesting because the infrastructure efforts for large banks to move towards this model is actually not neutral. It's, you know, there is cultural shift, infrastructure shift, but more importantly, it cannot just be a technology conversation. It needs to be a business strategy coming from top down. And I think that's where our commercial business, you know, starting first, really identified client needs in market, they know how to do it, and then started to move to their commercial wholesale base. And that's why we see later the retail coming in and folding into this platform strategy, because clients' needs are still evolving around it. I think, you know, it's been interesting that other countries, such as Mexico, are now thinking about pushing the regulation top down. So you clearly see commercial driver, regulation coming down, pushing this transformation in the financial services industry. We'll just repeat what we said before, which is it's the beginning of the journey, and the big unknown, especially in the retail banks, I think, side is what's the customer behavior, what's their appetite for it. So in the UK, it's been 1 year. that now it's in place. And I was reading lately, you know, like in commercial, in small business, definitely we see the traction. We see the B2B model. We see where is the business model, where is the API base coming. So, for example, iWoka, you know, which is a lending, was one of the first startup in the UK to consume and use the APIs. I think, you know, in the retail bank really have to materialize. So I think we're still, you know, pushing the customer base online, looking at their behavior, thinking about the journey end to end, what do they want to do, and that's remained critical.
And you know, maybe on that, just as a last question, because I know we haven't got too much time, but what are your predictions for how long it would take, and maybe for anyone who's out there who's thinking about how do they engage in this ecosystem, what would your advice be?
Just start. I think that it is possible nowadays to log onto a website, see the APIs, use sandboxes, start experimenting. I think, you know, the organisations on the stage today have those sandboxes available, I believe. So just log on, start, and then start building something, and then go back to your bosses and say, look, it was easy. You know, let's make this really happen for customers.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two camps, right? There's the traditional banks and the ones that I see most likely to win here. I think there is a bit of a first mover advantage, and maybe not winner takes all, but there's only going to be a few key vendors that are going to really unlock this potential before everyone else. And where I've seen it work really well is in large banks where the mandate has come down from the CEO and the board. I mean, HSBC has publicly said they want to lead the charge on being an API-first bank. Now, that's a good start, right? And it is, at that point, just go do it for the big banks. It's very, very hard for them to do that, but they're looking at it not as a technology change, but actually a culture shift in the way the business operates. I think for fintechs, they're already doing it, right? The fact that you know, Starling Bank can have a marketplace is because other fintechs already have APIs. That's the way in which they integrate with everything else. And you know, I think the key thing there is to understand how valuable that API is and really treat it as a product, because what will happen is the tipping point will be where there's enough demand. And we saw this in compute power, we saw it in social applications, we saw it thanks to the iPhone and the apps on the web, that there'll be a trigger, a tipping point where suddenly there'll be a mass flood to look for the best APIs and start building the best products, and it'll happen really quickly. And it's like every disruption. It's very slow and then extremely fast.
I think for me, the collaboration and building the community is the most important. And when I say that, I don't say that from a bank building a community, you know, just around us. I think, you know, the ones that are going to succeed in this story are the ones that stop thinking there is competition somewhere. At the end of the day, it's all there to make the life of the customer better. And I think, you know, what is critical is how do you learn the muscle to partner outside in, to bring that in your DNA, and to do it, either you are a fintech, either you are a bank, either you are a regulator or a government. It can only work if we work together and if we collaborate. I think the ones that are going to find the challenges are the ones that retrenched and say, okay, you know, like, I am looking at my business or I'm looking at my silo and I don't want to see what's going on outside. And we see, you know, like if we look at different models coming from Asia, what is very clear is that it's not only about the financial services, you know, like only conversations, but what customers do in their day-to-day, what are their interactions, where are they in their digital life and in their physical life. And this cannot be done just by yourself. It needs to be done through a partner ecosystem, and that's the criticality is really collaboration and partnerships.
Amazing. Well, please join me in thanking this amazing panel. Thank you.
Thank you.